Welcome to episode 6 of AI Activations. Today's special guest is Bajwa, whose fascinating career spans from working with the United Nations to serving as managing partner at Droga 5 to leading customer experience at Apple. Most recently, serving as Chief Creative Officer at the Obama Foundation, where he's reimagining what presidential library can look and feel like. Together, we'll explore the intersection of AI, design thinking, and human-centered innovation. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Just wanted to say thanks so much for making time available. And for the audience, I think this is going to be a great conversation. And my whole aim is to get Hash to speak. So if the more he speaks, the more gold will be in the conversation. But Hash, like you've got one of the most interesting backstories. And so I would love if you just take some time and just talk us through your career trajectory, especially Apple, the Obama Foundation, and just how you created experiences through that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm grateful for this forum because I think you all are exploring, the big questions around AI and how we as human beings think about technology. So I really appreciate a chance to share some of my work. Though not directly involved in AI, I hope it can be useful to some of your audience and people that are in your world as you think about and as they think about how to make sense of what's next with AI. My career is a very nonlinear one in that I actually started my career in a very not creative place, working at the United Nations as a communications person. I very much, maybe because of
Mm.
my immigrant background, really thought like we have to come together as a global community of people. And I never quite saw myself as American or Pakistani or whatnot. So I went in with a lot of idealism, hoping that I could bring that to the UN. And I learned it was the most uncreative place ever and run by very old people who, were not looking for new ideas. And I think a lot of my story kind of is rooted in wanting to be more creative and trying to help people make a shift to be more creative, in part because I had to do that in my college days and figuring out who I was. Half of my career was working in ad agencies, branding agencies, design agencies as essentially the digital and innovation lead, helping big brands figure out what's next with the web, with mobile, with social, and then working with creative teams, art directors, designers, writers to bring it to life. And so my theory of the case is we should always be curious and be looking for new canvases for creativity. And technology can help empower that, but it is still about a creative story, a creative product, a creative idea, a creative interaction that we apply to these new canvases or take these canvases and rethink them. And so I did a lot of that at agencies and worked with brands. I then sort of made quite a shift and went to Apple. I really believed I wanted to not just come up with ideas in a consulting way, but really do the hard work of creating something at a much bigger scale, and create something that would last and would have meaning beyond the quarter, beyond the campaign. And so technology at Apple really is that. It's beyond the trend. Technology can go beyond the trend. It can be something that transforms people's lives on a very meaningful way. And certainly Apple's history was that. And so I wanted to explore that. I wanted to take what I had learned kind of as a young creative, a young strategist, and bring that to the biggest brand in the world and see what I could learn from them. I've always been sort of guided by that as a compass. Where can I be learning
Mm.
something new? And how can I then take that and reconfigure it for value and for other kinds of things? And so I did this at agencies looking at the web as it was emerging in the early 2000s. And then at Apple, Apple was at a very unique moment in time. Steve Jobs had died. So this was 2013, 2012. And there was new people coming into the company. The company had gotten bigger than ever after Steve and had launched many, many products. And so my focus was on the store experience, which we actually treated like a product. Apple has
Mm.
always designed, with the iPhone, it's the hardware and the software together that makes an Apple product really seamless and integrated. And so the Apple store was our largest product. And it had hardware, which is the architecture, and software, which was what you can do inside of that experience. Now, today, lots of retailers are doing coffee shops and classes, but at that time, it was still kind of an emerging idea. And Apple had always had this history of the Genius Bar, where you could, a technical person could be there to help you fix your technology or learn about it. And we said, well, let's take that further and help inspire people about how to be creative. And so the whole store design was oriented around that, the programming, the experiences, the physical design. And we looked at all of Apple and said, let's pull all of Apple together for a human being to be able to learn to be more creative and to shift it from transactions to relationships. And I think this is so critical in technology. How do you transition from transactions to relationships? And Apple, unlike most technology companies, has a very human face. 75,000 Apple employees around the world in communities interacting with customers. So I found that fascinating. What is the experience that a big technology brand can do at a human level vis-a-vis the retail experience? I can talk more about that. But after 10 years or so there, I become restless. I'm someone who always wants to try something new and learn. And the pandemic had hit. I took a bit of a break, and that break was very helpful because it led me to actually meet and join the Obama Foundation in Chicago. Many people may not know what the Obama Foundation even is or does. After President Obama left the White House, he created a foundation to essentially help inspire and empower the next generation of civic leaders, creative leaders, essentially the next, Barack Obama. And so there's a number of programs around leadership, civic engagement, democracy, empowering girls in disadvantaged communities, et cetera. And sort of it's a home for a lot of different programs that the president cares about. But one of its biggest projects, its most, I think, the big bet is the Obama Presidential Center. And every president kind of has their library and museum, but I guess it wouldn't be unexpected that President Obama would do it a little differently than everybody else. And instead of kind of a dusty museum about one man's legacy, he has created a presidential center that is a very vibrant, living, dynamic, changing city community hub. And it has a museum, it has a library, it has an archive, it has a NBA level basketball center for the community. It's got gardens, it's got art, it's got fruit and vegetable teaching kitchens and cooking and food. And it's built to really inspire people on an everyday level about how they can be an actor and a participant in their community and in our global community. So it will be quite a different project. And my role there was to sort of look at the whole experience of this center. How does it add up to more than just the sum of its parts? Just like the Apple Store or an Apple product is more than just a camera lens and a glass and the pieces. It becomes, for lack of a better word, and it is overused, it's an experience. And it's something that's more than the product. And my belief is we go from products and services to experiences and transformations. I think AI is that kind of experience and transformation that will go beyond just a new product. And so anyhow, that was a big part of the last 3 years for me, was working with President Obama and his team on the architecture, the interior design, the programming, the brand, the digital experience. And I think for any technology leader, that is a huge part of what they now are being called to do, because technology runs through every part of what I just described. And certainly AI will as well. So anyhow, after the elections, everybody's a little bit burned out, as one can imagine. So I decided to take a break again and see what the next adventure will be. Anyways, that's my story and career in a nutshell.
Ash, I wanted to ask you this question based on what you just said. So there are two parts to it, right? So it's a little bit loaded, but I wanted to know the first part about your, personal experience of being creative. Like, I mean, like what you do, you're a creator, right? And I mean, I think as children naturally all are creative, and then somewhere along the line they lose it, right? And they stop being creative. So I would like to understand, like, just your views, if you can riff on that, like,
Yeah.
creativity, and on your personal level, like, you know, how did you self-discover you can be creative and successfully creative? And then I want to add to that, Hash, you mentioned like to be creative, need a canvas. And so, like, I mean, your canvas is so unique in terms of like its lights, flooring, technology. You mentioned previously at the Obama Foundation, it was the parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Everything
and
was a possible opportunity to delight people. And that
yeah,
I,
so
I
yeah, so
yeah, no,
just
no,
carry on.
yeah,
I love that
sure.
idea.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think I have a lot of imposter syndrome around this because I wasn't trained in a creative discipline. I'm not a graphic
Mm,
designer. I'm not an art director. I'm not a copywriter. I'm not a filmmaker, an artist. But I have learned to communicate and have the right language to work with people who are coming from those fields. And so my
mm,
personal canvas is probably the orchestration of creative work. And I think that's something that really great founders of companies can do. I think many executives who have a vision can guide creative teams. But I think it's uncommon. I think that's what I try to do, and that's where I think of my creativity. How can I pull together these different people to create an output that is better than if I wasn't there. That we did it
mm,
together. And Steve Jobs had a quote. He said his model of business is the Beatles. And he was asked a question in a conference, like, "What's your model of business? How do you lead?" And he said, "My model of business is the Beatles. Like, here's a band of four people who checked each other's weaknesses and strengths, and together created incredible music." And he went
mm,
on to say, on their when they broke up on their own, none of them was as great or as successful as they were together. And I think that is part of what my job as a creative leader is to think deeply about how to manage the band and point them
mm,
at the right canvas. And once you have that, then you can look at anything and say, how can it be more? And maybe that's another
mm,
part of it is seeing potential where others see just a checkbox. And so with the
mm,
presidential center as an example, like everybody's focused on the big, architecture, piece. Of course, that's the biggest piece that we should. But hey, the first place that a visitor is going to walk into that museum is going to be when they park their car in the parking garage. Is anybody
mm,
thinking about that? Other than just, being able to have lines on the ground, is this an opportunity to give people a taste of the experience that they're going to have? So then you take the band and you point them at that and say, what could we do with that? Should we do a mural of on the instead of just gray concrete? Is there a mural about President Obama in
mm,
Chicago made by kids in the community maybe? Instead of numbering the one to 500 for the parking spots, do we use words from the White House or from President Obama's life or sections like? Because it also has to be functional, right? Like that's also an important
mm,
balance. Is like creativity with purpose. Creativity with purpose leads to a great experience and a transformation.
mm,
And technology, AI, those are just tools that get flown into that, I believe. And so when I just to explain that a little more, one of the biggest challenges when you park your car at a big parking structure is how do you find your car? So what can we do to be very functional, but also delight people and be creative and add to the feeling of being at this center? So, sections of the parking lot will be named after, sort of iconic neighborhoods and things, and there'll be color and there'll be, art. And by the time you leave the parking lot, you're going to already have gotten a little energy about what you're going to go experience next. It's almost like a preview.
mm,
So pulling back to your question, I don't know that I ever really understood how to be creative. I think I learned how to work with creative people, and in doing that, found a way to be a little more creative myself. And I was lucky. I got to work with mentors and leaders who pushed what was possible with creativity. And you mentioned like kind of we have it and then we lose it somehow. There's a
Yes.
word in a Nigerian dialect. My friend who is from Nigeria told me it once, I can't remember the word, but he said there's instead of saying "Are you creative?" they say, "How are you using your creativity?" And so the assumption
Well,
is you still have your creativity. The question is, how are you using it? And I believe that we mistake often creativity with graphic design, motion, art. And I see it differently. I see creativity as a tool to solve a problem, and to do it in a way that is perhaps novel. Creativity as innovation. That's where I think about it, is less about, oh, hey, have the creative people make this look pretty. There is that, and we can do that. And I think beautiful things are an important part of our world as humans. And I think that's something we have to explore with AI. How do we continue to make sure we're creating a beautiful, vibrant, healthy life and world around us? But I think also creativity can very much be solving problems. And that's why like technology is exciting, because like that's another means to help achieve our goals, whether it's
mm.
AI or anything else. So yeah, we are all creative. The question is, how are we using our creativity?
But I love what you said about, I mean, for me, the key themes, Hash, from what you said is experience, relationship, and purpose. And, when you spoke about the band, I mean, I also heard in an interview Steve Jobs speak about um, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, which like really, ties into what you said about the Beatles. And I just want to get to quickly touch on the retail experience because, when you spoke about like the sum, that principle of the sum, what the whole is
Yeah.
greater than the sum of the parts, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
I mean, for experience, like you've got to focus on dozens of small things to constitute the experience, right? Like, so it's all these
Yes.
things
Yes.
that's
Yes.
really subliminal. I mean, when I had the I was fortunate to visit the Apple Visitor Center in Cupertino,
Oh
and
yeah.
when I walked,
Yes.
it was a crazy good experience. But I said to myself, like, most of the things that create my experience, I'm not even aware of, right? So,
Correct.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
things are, you get that sense, and then so just on that, and I mean, like, I think most people, when you spoke about imposter syndrome, I think what sets you apart, Hash, is like it's easy to take something bright and shiny and say go and be successful, but here someone says, Hash, here's retail, make
Yeah.
it, get people to go
Yeah.
out of the house and want to go, and even in South Africa, if I go in a mall on a Saturday morning, the shops are empty except the Apple store, right? So I mean, I think it's different to take something mundane like retail, and then to
Yes.
make that successful uh, in that experience, and people actually want to go there,
Yes. Well,
and
I,
spend
I
time
think,
there.
it's funny at Apple, a lot of people were like, "Oh, retail, that's kind of not as sexy or cool as like
Mm,
iPhone or iPad or Mac." And I always felt like there's no such thing as like a sexy brief or project, like the cool project and the not cool. It's kind of what you do with it. And I actually found there, you know, tons and tons of people are looking at the iPhone. And if you as an individual want to be new and different and create something with it, it's actually a lot harder because it has a stronger history. There's more people watching it. It's directly connected to all of Apple's revenue, and so I found it more exciting to look at something that had less eyes on it and look for the opportunity within that. I think that's what's exciting about technology in general, or AI too, is you want to be the one learning about it and figuring out something new, and then bringing others into that. And that's kind of how I looked at the Apple retail experience: is what can we do that's different here? And I think that's
Mm,
always a nice way to kind of guide one's creative career, is picking up the project that maybe someone else doesn't really want and finding a way to do something completely different with it.
mm,
Or when another thing for me is moments of transition, or moments of challenge. And so for Apple, they were going from a time where Steve had really driven this company, and iPhone was very successful, but they were launching Apple Music and games, and Watch, the Apple Watch, all these new things were coming out, and everybody was like, "Is Apple still gonna be around? Are they still going to be as good as they were under Steve?" So there was this kind of big question mark, and I thought that's such a great time because you do have to do something
mm,
new, and I could be part of that. Or a company that's actually struggling and trying to figure out what's next, and maybe they don't have, the world is changing around them. That's another great place for creativity, because again, there's more.
mm,
Something has to be done, and creativity can actually be a tool to get to something new. So I'm always looking for that. Like, where's an opportunity to do something a bit different? But I want to just like riff a little bit with you on what you mentioned about the things you don't see in an experience. Apple's very good at
yes.
that, but a lot of how it gets there is by starting with almost a super simple question. What do we want people to feel with this product,
Mm,
or with this experience, or with this store? What do we want people to feel? And that sort of sets an intention. And it sounds like that's like so simplistic. Like, how can
mm,
that even be, the business school kind of playbook is, you got, charts, and you've got, axes, and you're
mm,
targeting, and you're doing all these things and looking for the opportunity, and all of that is probably still very important, but starting with a very simple clarifying question that sets the intention is a great way to navigate new things, whether it's a new market, a technology, a new product, etc. And so for Apple, that question was very simple: what do we want people to feel? And so how do we want you to feel, to your question, when you walk into the visitor center or a store, then guides all those little decisions and questions and innovations
mm,
and choices you may see or not see, to kind of add up to that. And what Apple has done well, that I think other companies also can do, is having a really good editor of all those little things to make sure we're putting it together in the right way. And that comes back to this idea of the whole needs to be greater than the sum of the individual parts. So it's not just that
mm,
the Apple Store has like lots of details of little things everywhere. It's that it's been orchestrated together under this intention of feeling, with strong creative editors or leaders in the mix to make sure that that actually does happen. And so going back to what I said a moment ago, that's the creative canvas I'm interested in, is orchestrating the pieces to ladder up to the brand, or the feeling, or the
mm.
intention, or the goal.
I want to just book in that by this with this question, Ash.
Yeah.
Like so, like most people like me storm in, storm out of shops, experiences, museums, and then it was a bad experience. It was a good experience. I'm not sure why, but it was. You like you see the detail, right? So you carry a level of burden that other mere mortals don't. How do you deal with that? Because you must. I mean, if you go to a museum, or you go to a city, or you go to wherever, a library, uh, like
Yeah.
do you see the bad? It might be a
Yeah,
bit personal, this
I'm like,
question.
oh, I would do the museum ticket desk differently, and I would do this
Yeah.
differently. I do that. I definitely have that reaction with museums and cultural institutions. I work so much on the Obama Center, but also with stores. But with stores, I get really excited because people are trying new things. There's not like
Mm,
one way to do a store anymore, and I'm always very curious actually to learn. And I think that's why, before Apple, I wasn't a retail person at all. I brought a different sensibility to retail. And I think that is another opportunity for people to be creative. Like you don't have to have 30 years in a certain industry
uh,
to be an expert at it. What is more interesting is what new ideas do you bring? We live in a world that is so interconnected, intersectional, where different worlds are intersecting. And so to create a museum, even, yeah, there's things you need to make the museum work that has a certain expertise. You need that, yes. But if you're trying to not
mm,
just create what's been created before, then it helps to have inputs from other places. I was just looking at the V&A Museum, classic British museum, wonderful exhibits, beautifully put together. And they just created a new one in London called the V&A Storehouse. But it's like you're
mm,
walking through their actual archives, and the art and the statues and all these pieces of work are essentially like in a warehouse. Now it's been done beautifully with great architecture, but it's a totally different interaction with the people. It's almost like
mm.
you're sneaking around, behind the private part of the museums. um, but it's actually teaching people the like process of how you manage these artworks, how they're restored, how they're cared for. It's a very different feeling that they're trying to create, and I love that they looked at something very different, kind of the back of house and pulled it up front. That's sort of
Mm,
the kind of lateral contrarian thinking that I think can keep pushing things to be different. And I think Apple's very known for this. Steve talked a lot about how when they got into music, it was because a lot of the engineers were musicians. They made iPod
mm,
because they wanted a better way to listen to their own music. It wasn't just that there were technology people looking for another technology product to create. They were coming from that personal feeling of what do I need? What do I want? And I think again, just intersecting worlds, like taking the thinking in one space and applying it to
mm,
something else. I think now more than ever, our culture is very much like that. This is inspired by that. This artist is riffing on this person from the past, and they're looking for things.
mm,
Museums are becoming more like stores, and stores are becoming more like museums, and fashion shows are becoming more like galleries, and blah blah blah. Like there's just
mm,
a constant recombination. So that just requires people to be curious. I've always thought curiosity is the root of all creativity. If you're a little curious, you start looking around. As soon as you stop being curious and you just fall back on either what you already know
mm.
or what other people think, then things start to plateau.
I read Lewis Hamilton said curiosity skilled the cat instead of
Oh, I
killed the
love that.
cat.
Oh, really?
And,
That's cool.
and when I
That's a
read that,
good
I thought,
quote.
well, I love that. I just wanted to ask you something else, Ash. And so maybe just a backstory. So I watched this documentary on the Norwegian band Aha when they were massive in South America and South Africa, and they had one song that just blew the charts. And in the interview, they said that song, was their best friend because it brought them to the biggest concerts. And then they could never match that song in popularity and uptake. So that song became their worst enemy. And they tried to divorce themselves from that song, for a decade or more
Oh, wow.
in the band's existence. And then they became again best friends with that song, and it became endearing. And I wanted to ask you, I see behind you there's a book called After Steve. And so
Oh, yeah.
watching that documentary on on AHA, it reminded me of Steve Jobs' legacy because if you go to
Yes.
Reddit, people say Steve would never have done this. This would never happen under Steve. So it's like this immense burden of
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like he never made mistakes. He would not do this. He would do that. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost like a blessing and also a curse at this stage.
It's true, and I wonder a lot about that with successful companies that have strong founders. What happens after those founders are no longer involved? With President Obama, frankly, like a lot of people were inspired by him, but even when we were
Mm,
building that, I was like, what would he want or do? And he's still alive, of course, but there's people project their own desires and or what they would like to hear onto these sort of big figures.
Mm,
I have observed. What I've sort of feel Apple's done pretty well is not to there's not quotes from Steve Jobs on every wall, and there's not like a sort of reverence for him that would handcuff the company to like always be
mm,
asking what would he do. And I think he set that tone actually pretty well. Also, I think most people will know listening, Steve Jobs had his own, chapters, and he changed his mind
mm,
on things. People like to
mm,
think he was the genius that like had the flash, but most often I think he was editing other people's work and steering them and trying to think about that. And he was also very practical, like to your earlier point about seeing, oh, like you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, or going to a museum or store and having all these, thoughts. You a lot of times, creative people, I think, can need an editor to tell them to focus less or
mm,
more on things. And that was what was so magical about, I think, Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive as a partnership. Steve will pull Johnny back from going too far and into too many details and helped focus him and his team on the right things. Um, so I always like to look at legacy in terms of less about the reverence and more about the relevance.
mm.
I think that's
Oh,
the best way to do it. And what I mean by that is like what is relevant of what has been created. Like we have to live in the now with the conditions of
mm,
now. And Steve doesn't live in that. He's not in that world.
mm,
But what can we draw from his work as inspiration for us? So oftentimes, I might go back and say, how did he talk about the Apple Store in 2000 when it first came out? And and there may be some interesting words in that are relevant to pull out. But it's not like, oh, he said it should be this, we need to make it that. Because then you're
mm,
you're
mm,
you're you're limiting yourself and it doesn't apply. So yeah, relevance, not reverence, I think is the motto I apply to this idea of legacy. And by the way, it's a tremendous, yeah, it is an honor and burden. Like you got this incredible
mm,
person who created an incredible company. I found it fun and interesting to learn more and more about how he worked. Um, Again, as inspiration and mix that with our own ways that we bring to it. And that he was
mm,
always sort of talking about things like that, like add your verse to the story. The
mm,
story isn't just that person's legacy. But I think about this in other places too. President Obama, Mandela in your country, and other people that have
mm,
these towering figures. And I think not the mistake, but very naturally, individuals apply what they want to hear and think to that. They're
mm,
they're they're a vehicle for your your interests. And
mm,
they're not there to, contradict it. So it becomes really easy to say, "Wow, I think this is what he meant." I try to get past that and think about what can we do that's new, because even Steve or these great figures wouldn't they would be thinking about things anew, and say,
yes.
oh my gosh, AI, like what should we do with that? And they might have a playbook from what has been successful in the past,
Mm,
but even Apple changed its playbook along the road, right? It wasn't just the Apple of from the beginning. It's gone through many
mm,
changes too. So Steve was very, I think, from what I can understand, um, willing to adjust. And so therefore we have to look at his work and say, okay, he didn't have the answer to everything.
mm.
What can we bring to it? And I think
I
even
wanted
that way,
to,
now with technology, I think there's a quick desire to be like, okay, Sam Altman and OpenAI, and they know everything. And like, I don't think they know everything. Like, I think they, like Steve at that time, was trying to figure it out. Even when the Apple
mm,
Store was first launched, I think he said to the head of Apple retail, "It's like, all right, let's do this. Just don't lose a lot of money." And like, he wasn't even sure if it was going to work, you
that is
know.
so good.
But he believed it was something worth trying. and and there were plenty of things in Apple's history that didn't work that he thought was going to
Mm,
work. We all, it's really easy to remember the successes. It's
mm,
harder to kind of remind that, oh, there were some things that didn't work either. And so I think what do I take away from that is like, let's try stuff. If
Yeah.
if our intention is strong, if that initial thinking is right, if we're thinking about humans and what they want out of the experience, let's try stuff. And I think AI is that space where it's much more interesting to try things. And I'd be very careful about anybody who thinks that they've figured out what to do with AI.
I want to pivot to AI, but just a last
Yeah,
question on curiosity. I mean, like I'm a disciple of Naval Ravikant. I don't know if you know him, but it's like he speaks about following your natural curiosity quite a bit.
yeah, yeah.
So I wanted
Interesting.
to ask you, you mentioned before we went on air about in the iPhone really, building on existing, handsets and it was just wildly successful. And there's this whole thing of what's after the iPhone and like what's the next
Mm,
what's the next iPhone? And so I mean, like from what you're saying, one shouldn't think of you should think about what's available and not think what's the next iPhone. So I mean, there's been the
yes.
humane pin that failed. There was that orange red rapid device that failed. I think Andy
Oh
Rubin,
yeah.
ex Google, came with the Essential phone and the
Oh yeah, I think I
Essential
have
Hub.
it.
Oh yeah, there you go.
It's a
So
great paperweight now. It's a great paperweight.
so that's so good. So just share your thoughts, and you did just before we went live, but just like your view on it might not be a device. Like you're big on orchestration and bringing like these elements
Right,
together. How,
right,
how do you
right.
see the future of like the next device might not be a device. It might be an experience like you've been alluding to.
Yeah. Well, again, my bias is that I don't come from engineering and product development. Um, I come from brand and experience design, whatever, you wanna take that as. And so I start from the place of like, what are people, what are people naturally doing? And how might we evolve that? And I think
Mm,
sometimes engineering and product people come at it from a much kind of like, this is the next thing, let's go build it. And I think I'm coming at it from a little bit more of an iterative place. That's also kind of Apple's way, right? People like to think Apple created the next big thing, whether it was the watch or the iPad or the iPhone, but really those things all existed before Apple did
mm,
them. Apple just iterated on it a lot and then gave it its own twist, but always from that place of human interaction. Um, and so that's how I look at it. And so I think number one, what are people naturally doing? Glasses,
mm,
jewelry, clothing, our natural environment is something to always, start with. And if you take that, then I think second sort of clue, and by the way, I think that's all we can do is look at the clues
yeah,
that might be out there and see what we do with them. I don't think it's about grand gestures of this is the new platform. And we've
mm,
seen, people were doing smartphones before Apple did it, and it wasn't the new platform yet. What allowed the iPhone to really be that turning point? And even there, it took a few years before everybody had an iPhone or a smartphone or that kind of device that they kind of pioneered. So number one, what's natural to how people are living? Number two, is there a way to orchestrate those pieces? And I think about even with AI, I think this is going to be an important thing there too. How do we orchestrate the different
mm,
elements that are around us to be useful in some positive way? So for example, I'm here on looking at an iMac. I've got my phone. I've got my watch. I'm gonna walk out and my electric smart vehicle.
mm,
So and I think there's a certain orchestration that maybe could be interesting to look at in terms of what's next. Like, what's the continuity of things across devices? Uh, what's the intelligence? Maybe that's the new next
mm,
big thing. I don't know. The intelligence behind the device. Maybe it's no longer about a device. It's more about the 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 interaction, the intelligence, the smarts, the know-how, the contextual knowledge. I think that's long
Mm.
promised. That contextually technology will know where you are, what you're doing, and be able to give you the right thing at the right time. My own feeling is that sounds really good on a piece of paper in a pitch deck, but you have to be able to create it. And humans and the way we live is quite messy. And so I think it's quite hard to solve that problem. And I think, again, technology people often try to solve the problem with a technological solution. And I don't think that's, often the case.
Mm.
Even things, like the Apple Vision Pro, I don't think it's following that natural direction that I was describing.
Mm.
I think it's this big clunky thing. Now, in the future, it could become something like my eyeglasses, and that would
Mm.
be a natural thing. But would stuff on my lenses and in my ears actually be something I would keep on? I'm not sure. And I don't have the answers. I don't think anybody does. But let's iterate, let's try.
Mm.
My own personal feeling is there's going to be some orchestration of these natural
Mm.
devices, AirPods plus glasses plus your device. And the device could become as simple as a piece of glass, something
Mm.
that's just super, super simple and invisible even. But I don't know. These are all things that I look forward to seeing what others do and what they create.
But I like what you're saying about context and orchestration, because if I look at the studies, that's becoming increasingly important, having context and having orchestration. I want to get to AI, and I've been burning to ask you this question, Ash.
Okay, let's do it.
So, so we know UX, right? User experience. I mean, if I think of UX, I think of iOS, website.
Yep.
Then after a while, developer experience became important. Like, how
Yes.
does developers experience the UI they're using to develop? Now there's this new idea of AX, AI experience.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
how do we experience AI? So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And just before we went live, you said, who would have imagined ChatGPT, a chatbot? That's so
Yeah.
wildly successful and popular. Who would have thought we would have wanted to chat? you know,
Right, right. Yeah, like obviously AI and chat bots have been around in some form. ChatGPT kind of captured the zeitgeist a few years ago, I think we can agree. And at that time, I remember being inside Apple, I was like, AR is the thing, VR,
mm,
Zuckerberg was talking about metaverses and things, and kind of suddenly this really smart AI powered chatbot, ChatGPT, it's in the name chat, kind of took over. And it really supplanted like the chatbot. Like chatbots were seen as this sort of dumb transactional thing on websites that could never really answer your question. And this is so different, right? I fully believe that. But yeah, it was sort of surprising that the interface of the future is essentially a text box. Now that can go into lots of places, right? You can talk to it. People are talking about, AI, maybe Johnny Ive and Sam Altman are going to create some kind of new devices that listen and talk, and all of that's exciting. To me, the innovation is again, intelligence behind the chat GPT interface. But the interface that we deal with mostly for AI right now in that sense is the conversational chat piece. And I just think that's very interesting that, we were talking about immersive 3D worlds, right after the pandemic, with metaverse and VR, AR, is, so much talk about AR. And then suddenly it was like this thing came out. I'm actually very interested though in how you were asking about the device of the future or the next big platform,
mm,
from computers to iPhones to whatever's next. But I actually am curious about this interface piece because, I think I was searching for something. I was asking questions to ChatGPT about something, and I got like a map, and I got like there's a whole interface inside of the text chat interface that within the OpenAI ChatGPT app, and that got me thinking like, who's designing that? Like, if I'm never going to
mm,
go to Safari or Chrome, if I'm sitting inside of a an AI chat interface, like how is that being designed to not just replicate the medium that we're used to, which was, the web browser or apps, and
Mm,
like pulling it into that's sort of intriguing as well. What is the interface inside of AI products? And what
mm,
does voice play a role in that? Perhaps. I think people still struggle with that. Alexa came out with their new versions, not been a hit, a lot of glitches, a lot of
mm,
issues. Siri still needs a brain transplant. I mean, it may get there. It may get there. Again, who am I to say? I think we just have to keep
mm,
exploring. So to me, the interface is very exciting, and the UX or UI meets artificial intelligence is quite an interesting
mm.
place.
The thing is also when you spoke about like this simple interface, I mean, if I think back in the day, Alta Vista, Yahoo, all
Mm,
the search engines was just cluttered, and then Google came with this just
yeah,
search. It's all about
so
search,
simple.
and,
Yeah.
and they caught you on the flip side with sponsored links and ads and stuff.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's interesting, like it's AI is going that same route with this ultra minimalistic UI.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
right. That's right. Yeah.
um,
I know I think I heard that Grok was going to introduce ads into their AI interface, and I thought, God, okay, so we're like following the Google playbook, but now with like maybe, but what Google did so smartly is they changed the monetization model of search,
mm,
right? And that was a game changer. So they didn't just say we're going to
mm,
plaster banner ads on Google and keep you in our world the way Yahoo had done, or AltaVista, or these other early search players. They were like, we're going to get you to the right link as fast as possible, and we'll monetize that. Meaning, the kind of relevance, the relevant links. You know what I mean. So
mm.
I'm
Yes, yes.
excited to see like what will be the monetization models of AI. Will it? I have no idea, but what I
Mm,
do know is it should be new to the medium, just as
yes.
throughout everything. The first TV ads were sort of like radio ads, and the first internet ads were trying to be like mini TV commercials, and then search came along and changed that whole thing, and now ad blockers have killed the banner ad. Like it's very like it's always about kind of understanding a new medium, and I would say the new medium is still evolving, very hard to know. And
Mm,
so that's why when I hear Grok is like cracking monetization, I think that's more opportunistic from a monetary
mm,
perspective, and not like a paradigm shift in how people make money. And I'll say that Google also allowed people, small businesses, to get traffic to make more money. Like, it wasn't
mm,
just at that time, it didn't feel like it was monetization for the sake of one big tech company. It felt like they were creating a new ecosystem for how businesses and the internet was going to make money together and help
mm,
and the user, right? Yeah, Google cared about the user at that time. So
mm,
I'm excited to see how that might be. I also think AI can just be an incredible tool that plugs into other businesses. And I think you all at Kore.ai are doing interesting things in that space as well,
mm,
where it's not about necessarily like monetizing the chat bot or the chat interface. It's
mm,
more about like the AI tool being a powerful asset to a brand. So the way I think about that is like, okay, you know any brand, insert brand and company, like, oh cool, you got your products and services. How do you thread AI through the products and services to make them more valuable, to
mm,
create differentiation, to create better service is so powerful for Apple, right? Like, when you're interacting with Apple Store employees, they're not trying to sell you something, they're trying to help you. And there's a difference, you can see when it's not
mm,
that way. So maybe that's the exciting thing, is AI as a thread that makes
mm.
experiences smarter, more valuable, more monetizable, more relevant, more useful. I'd love to see more exploration of things like that.
But just the last, just to book in the conversation on AI. I mean, like you bring to mind like this idea for me that I don't have electricity for the sake of electricity. I have it to run appliances and have lights. I don't make a fire for the sake of making a fire. I do it for heat and to cook food. And you just, while you were speaking, you brought to mind this idea of we're still at this stage of having AI for the sake of AI. And
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I encountered this a lot with the early 2000s when kind of the more modern Web 2.0 kind of consumer web was being built out and was becoming very popular everywhere, right? Early 2000s, right? And then social and then mobile. And so like those three steps of going from kind of the modern post.com web to mobile to social, all of those three pieces. And a lot of times, and unfortunately, I think it still happens, people say, "Oh, we should have an app." Well, why? Why should you have an app? Oh, because we should have an app. Like everybody has an app. And I think that is such an that's the technology leading the brand instead of the brand leading the technology. And when I say brand, again, I'm not talking logos and colors. I'm talking, the what this company and its products stand for in the world and what their proposition is to people to help people or be useful or to be, valuable or enjoyable or whatever, adjective. It all has to start with that. And it's so simple to say that, but a lot of brands unfortunately don't do that. They're like, okay, if you're a marketer, like I gotta cover all my bases, and I need to have this because if my boss asks me what's my AI strategy, I gotta have an AI strategy. I personally believe AI is way more vast, emerging still, more powerful, more transformative than any of these sort of steps I've mentioned. However, so therefore we have to learn. We have to learn. We have to spend time. But it doesn't mean that we have the answer and AI strategy. I would rather make sure our brand strategy is smart, our go-to-market, our connection with customers is strong, is relevant, is rooted in insights that are true about the people, and our products are good. And in parallel, on every step of the way, internal, external, marketing, product, we should be experimenting, trying, learning, playing, using with AI, and continue to see how it emerges because it is still emergent. And I'm definitely not one that believes, oh, this is all hype. Nor am I someone who's like, oh my God, this is everything, humanity is doomed. It's so good that humanity like I do believe either of those things may have some truth, but we got to kind of swim in the AI seas, so to speak, to figure out what of it will be useful. I get very nervous when someone says like AI strategy because I actually think that becomes a cover for like their own product and brand challenges. And then it becomes like I just have to chase that because everybody's talking about it. And I'd rather you play with it, you experiment, you be curious. Let's go back to that. Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing for executives, or senior leaders in an organization is to not just sort of read what other people are saying about AI or ask your teams, what's our AI strategy. I think they need to explore. Curiosity about AI will lead to creativity and value.
I like that. Nick has had time for one more question before you land the
Sure.
plane. So Ash, we started on a personal level, and I want to end with a personal level. On a personal level, like listening to you, I realized you didn't make any assumptions, and I think that's part of your.
I hope I
being,
did. I hope I did. I'm always concerned that
what,
I'm like a
no,
talking head coming out
no,
with something. I really don't know. I share from my
and,
experience, but I do it with a lot of curiosity, and I hope to learn.
yeah, and I think that's a strong point, like not making assumptions, but trying to figure things out. And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, previously you suffer from imposter syndrome, but
Oh yeah.
I wanted you just to double click on that because I think, when you mentioned that, and I thought about you not making assumptions, it's almost like you're on that cusp, right? So you find yourself just ahead of the wave, and like it's if you bet behind the curve, it's easy to make assumptions. But I think the imposter syndrome is natural if you find yourself in the space you find yourself historically, where it's it's really on the leading edge, and you like, it's almost like this doubt: will this come off or won't it?
Well, thank you for saying that. Here's my takeaway that over 20 plus years of sort of trying to work through my imposter syndrome. I think it's really interesting to try and see around corners. When you see around corners, you're looking at what's next, but you're not imagining something that's impossible to create. I think a lot of times we try to imagine a future, smart home future, automated driving future, AI future, and it gets into this place where people are making tons of assumptions, and
Mm,
most of the time, those things have never really been accurate. They might give us a sort of flavor, but what do you do with it? Microsoft does this all the time. They do these vision videos about like the future of the tablet, and it's fun for tech people to probably watch that, but it's very tech
mm,
forward and not necessarily, human rooted. So I like to
mm,
sort of come back to seeing around corners. It's kind of an Apple thing too, of let's not come up with the in 20 years the thing we think is gonna
mm,
be there. Let's look like the next 3 to 5 years or even 3 years.
mm,
And I think that even that timeline is shrinking as things are kind of rapidly evolving, especially in the AI space, as you know. So to me, it's like
mm,
let's what can we do to look around the corner, see what's ahead of us a little bit, and pull that back and say, okay, I'm going to need to like deal with this when I make that turn. So
mm,
and I think that's different than just living quarter to quarter. I think business executives are often like caught up in that. Like, what do I need to deliver this quarter for my CEO? And so that's living in the right now. And then you hope a little bit somewhere on the side, the future will, present itself.
mm,
But I like to kind of mix that. Like, yes, run the
mm,
business, but look around the corner and see what's ahead. And I think that could be a great combination. So again, just like with AI, is it the thing that's going to, save and change everything, or is it absolutely, a trend that we don't need to worry about? It's sort of the same kind of idea. Do I stay in the present or do I look to the future,
mm,
10 years? I think both you want to be kind of managing the center of that.
mm,
So for me, that's how I've managed to like not get caught up in assumptions, but be ahead
mm,
of the curve just enough and kind
mm.
of look for data points that like, oh yeah, this is different. This isn't metaverse 2.0. This is more transformative. I just don't know how yet. But I can see that if there's enough data points that it could be and it can be.
Mm,
Those are two different things. So
mm.
that's my take. Look around corners. That's the way to the future.
Great. I think that's a great note to end on. Nick, thanks
Thank
for
you.
putting this together.
Yeah,
Over
it
to
was
you, Nick.
awesome. And, we spent almost an hour. So time flies when you're having fun.
Thank
But
you.
thank you so
Well,
much for
thank
joining us, Ash.
No, thank you for inviting me, and I hope this is valuable to your audience and your community and your teams.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Great. See ya.
Chat
Thank
soon.
you.